Hello, Petal. How you doing? How are things going? I'm still watching out for everybody, and I'm thinking there are people that haven't been around, and I'm just a bit worried. So thank you to everybody who's got in touch and dropped a line, and I will be catching up on it. It's just last week was a week and a half. You know how it goes, and I would be remiss if I came on here and I was recording and I wasn't in the best headspace. So things are improving, and we have chapter 16 of Here Comes the Sun, which is the last sort of shorter chapter. The next ones we've got are actually quite long, and I think that's a good thing, because this week let's get January out of the way and we can go rocketing into 2025. I'm sorry I haven't been around. It's been a time. But glad to be back, glad to be here, and I hope you're all doing okay. I do. Please touch base and let me know how you are. All of yous. If you want to drop an email instead of leave a comment, please do. I do really appreciate it, and I know I've got a couple that I'm going to be able to have a look at later on and enjoy, so that's a good thing. So lovely beans. Chapter 16 of Here Comes the Sun by our beloved Mr. Tom Holt. Look, said Bjorn, stopping suddenly and placing a shovel-sized arm on his guide's sleeve. Where is this? There was a faint crackle, and Bjorn hastily removed his hand. It was tingling painfully. The guide pointed down the tunnel. Look, he replied. For the record, the guy was a small, hunched entity, entirely wrapped up in what looked like an oversized monk's habit. In fact, the costume was so voluminous that Bjorn had to take his own word for it that there was anyone in there at all. Where? He said. There, the guide replied. My name is Tzz, by the way. Sorry? Tzz. I thought that's what you said. Bjorn's eye followed the line of the pointing sleeve and lit upon a sign nailed to the wall. By the dim ambient light, it gave Bjorn a really nasty shock when he realised that it was coming from inside Tzz' cowl. He could just about read what it said, and it said Piccadilly Circus, and it also said Times Square, and Place de la Concorde, and something else in Cyrillic lettering, and something else in Chinese, neither of which Bjorn could actually read. To make matters worse, it said them all at the same time. Oh, Bjorn said. Tzz chuckled, and a few blue sparks floated out from under his robe. I know, he replied, and Bjorn noticed that he didn't so much speak as crackle. Confusing, isn't it? And now we'd better be getting on, or we won't miss the train. Do we want to miss the train? Bjorn inquired. Well, Tx replied. Narrator's notes. I will need to think of a different way to say this, because I don't know how to say TZZX. For me, naturally, it'd be like Tx. But anyway, Tx replied. Since he'll be coming down this tunnel at approximately 55 miles an hour, I think it would be sensible. Zix scuttled away up the tunnel, moving amazingly quickly, and Bjorn followed him. Now, for someone who was completely swathed in ill-fitting brown sackcloth and no perceptible legs, Zix had a fair turn of speed, and the way he managed to avoid treading on his own hem was little short of miraculous. Narrators know anybody that's worn a long dress. Seriously, that's, yeah, I think I've told you the story about when I used to wear I had a beloved long skirt. It was kind of like just a straight down skirt, like very goth, because that's just how it was. And there was a time when two of my friends and we were in a town, and I thought I saw somebody in the bar, and I came in, realised it wasn't, I just came in, I ran in, thought it was somebody I hadn't seen for ages, realised it wasn't that person, ran back out again, tripped down the 2 steps, tripped down my skirt, did a commando roll and ran away. My friends were absolutely corpsed in the alleyway. Well, it was a coaching house, so it's kind of like had an arched alleyway sort of thing. They were absolutely howling 200 yards back that way. I digress. Oh, sorry about the snortles there. Right, okay, we'll try. We are in the subway, Zix was saying. I thought it'd be quicker than walking. We are walking, Bjorn pointed out. Running, even? Yes, replied Six, and Bjorn noticed that the gap between them was widening, even though he had broken into a jog. But we're walking in a subway. Makes a difference, you see. Does it? Naturally. Here we are. The ceiling lifted and the walls became wider apart. On the left-hand side, Bjorn could see a platform, about 2 feet higher than the floor of the tunnel. It looked remarkably like a platform in a station on the Paris metro. If you like, Six called out, we can take a train all the rest of the way. Bjorn clambered up onto the platform and sat down beside the cowled figure on a bench. It took him several minutes to catch his breath. I bet you don't know how the subway works, Six said. You'd like betting on certainties, I can tell. Six laughed again. Funny sound, Bjorn thought, like the noise you get when you accidentally put something metal in a microwave and switch on. The subway, Six said, is an urban short-haul passenger transport network designed to take the load off congested surface routes in peak time. Really? Bjorn replied. You amaze me. A fat green spark floated out from under the cowl, drifted in the air for a few seconds and vanished. All right, said Six, if you don't want to know. Sorry, Bjorn said, but I knew all that bit already. I've been on subways hundreds of times, but not this one. There's only one, Six replied. Here's the train. Sure enough, a tube train pulled into the station and opened its doors. Bjorn frowned. It was unmistakably a tube train. In fact, that was what was getting to him. It was the most quintessential tube train he'd ever seen. Come on, Six said. They climbed in and sat down. The compartment was empty, apart from a half-empty carton of pasteurised milk, which got up in a marked manner and moved right down to the other end of the carriage. Milk doesn't like me, sighed Six. It thinks I turn it sour. How do you mean? There's only one, Bjorn said. As he spoke, he realised what his subconscious had been driving at. The compartment they were sitting in was every underground railway carriage he'd ever been in New York, in Paris, Moscow, London, anywhere, all at the same time. Exactly that, Six replied. There is only one network. They just call it different things in different places. The train rattled away out the station and into a dark tunnel. Bjorn surreptitiously fingered his penknife in his trouser pocket and tried to locate the two-handed claymore attachment by touch. It's a whole different dimension down here, Six went on. It really amazes me how few people notice. You'd have thought it had been obvious. Should it? No, that was a little plastic magnifying glass you couldn't actually see through, and that's the scissors which will just about cut sellotape 3 times out of 7, and that's a nail file. Think about it, Six replied. Name me a subway station. Bjorn considered. Oxford Circus. The cowl nodded. A classic example, Six said, shooing away a small steel bolt which had unscrewed itself from somewhere and was now buzzing around his head like a lovesick moth. Has it ever occurred to you that by the time you've gone down the escalator and trudged all along those miles of corridor to get to the right platform for the central line, you've actually walked a damn sight further than the actual distance between Oxford Circus and Bond Street, and it still takes 3 minutes to get from Oxford Circus station to Bond Street station in the train once you get on it? True or false? Bjorn thought hard. He said. It's because of the dimensional shift, you see, Six explained. In this dimension, all the destinations are exactly the same distance from each other, and you travel, well, he hesitated, crackled like a car radio under a power cable, and continued, well, it's like at right angles to sideways, I guess, or more accurately, at an angle of 450 degrees to the vertical. Bjorn relaxed. When you are trapped in a strange dimension with a weird shapeless stranger in a cowl who gibbers to you about mathematics, there's nothing like finding a 10-inch length of copper piping filled with lead at the bottom of your knapsack. Bjorn wasn't 100% certain where it had come from, but he was very glad it was there. He wrapped a hand around it gratefully. Okay, he said. Suppose you're right. How come you don't get on the train at Les Invalides and find the next stop's Tottenham Court Road? Under the cowl, a blue light glowed smugly. Easy, said Six. Nothing ever exists in just one dimension. When you get on the train, usually you're also in the dimension of time, and a whole lot of other ones which we needn't bother with right now. They restrain you from getting outside the matrix. It's like a sort of seatbelt or something. In the sorting office of his mind, Bjorn picked out the word in Six's last statement that had triggered off the alarm system in his pineal gland. It was usually. Right now, though, Six went on, we're sort of free-floating outside all the regular dimensions. If you're interested, the three we are in are metro, fear and bureaucracy, and if you hit me with that copper pipe, it'll be the worse for you. Bjorn tightened his knuckles around the pipe. There are times when it's appropriate to believe what you're told, and times when you hit people. You sure Dob sent you? He asked. That? Six threw back his cowl, and this is a very approximate and inaccurate description of a profoundly complex operation, rolled up his sleeves. There was nothing to be seen but a fountain of blue and red sparks. I was having you on there, I'm afraid. Bjorn nodded, raised the pipe above his head and lashed out at the centre of the cloud of sparks with all of his strength. There was a loud bang, and it started to rain molten copper. I was telling the truth about trying to hit me, though, said a voice in the centre of Bjorn's brain. Then there was nothing except the rush of a few million particles being dragged apart and sucked away into an infinite vacuum. Of the many results of this, the last significant was an old lady living in a converted railway carriage somewhere in Nebraska received an electricity bill for $8,300,036.15, which puzzled her. As she explained to her nephew, it wasn't the size of the bill so much as the fact that she'd only just paid the last one. The forecourt of the offices of the Department of Time is about the only place in the entire administration complex where you can ever have a hope of parking, and even then you have to know the ropes. Now what you do is this. Before you leave to go there, you phone Gerald, the doorman, and ask him to preserve a place for you. Now this is vitally important, and it is vitally important that you get the verb right. If in doubt, spell it for him, because if he just reserves you a place, then by the time you get to park, your vehicle will long since have fallen apart under the normal pressure of entropy. Preserving is different. It involves using the department's special relationship with time to backdate your reservation a couple of centuries or so. One final word of advice. It's well worth slipping Gerald a minimum of 15 cruises once you've parked, unless you want to come back from your meeting to find that your vehicle has been valet parked a couple of centuries away, probably in a stable, boxed in by ox carts. Thanks, Gerald, Ganga therefore said, and there was a clink of money changing hands. Do you think you could get us a taxi? No sweat, boss, Cheryl replied, and winked. When were you wanting it for? Now, please note Gerald's extremely careful choice of verb tense. It doesn't do to be grammatically imprecise around Gerald. The senior executive officer who once told him, "Call me anytime you're ready," was forced to retire early with critical tinnitus because Gerald is really ready pretty well all of the time and has been most of his life. In about half an hour's time, Ganga replied, "In the future," he added quickly. Okay? In fact, there are a great many things about the Department of Time which require extreme caution until you are used to how they work. You need a postgraduate degree in temporal theory just to walk through the revolving door if you want to come out the same century you entered. This explains why Ganga and stuff went in via the Coles chute. They found Jane sitting on her own in a large office behind a desk you could have played football on, hunched over a thick pile of papers, a calculator and a 6-handed clock. She looked up as they walked in and frowned. "Hello," she said. "You're late." Staff did a quick but violent double-take. Ganga merely smiled. "I forgot," he said. "We should have known that you have seen today's rushes yesterday. Were we held up in traffic?" Jane nodded. It's the one good thing about the old system, she said. You can always take an advanced look at what unforeseen things are going to happen in the next few days. Gives you a chance to know what not to expect. Encourages sloppy planning, though. Ganga took his usual seat on the edge of the desk, noticing as he did so that the papers which covered the rest of it to a depth of 6 inches had been specifically cleared away for him. Nice touch. Any progress so far? He asked. Jane shrugged. Well, that depends, she said. That's the tiresome thing about the whole setup, really. She sighed. For instance, she went on, I finally managed to persuade the personnel people to try out some of the new staff rosters. Nobody liked the sound of them at first, but we negotiated a bit, and finally everyone agreed to give them a month's trial, starting on the 20th. Staff nodded.
Well done, you, he said. So where's the problem?
The problem, Jane replied wryly, is that out there on the shop floor, it's been the 19th for the last 3 days, the same 24 hours over and over again. I think it's called working to rule. Ganga clicked his tongue sympathetically. Never mind, he said. It was a nice try. Now, come on, let's go and have some lunch. I thought we might try... I know, Jane interrupted. I booked us a table. I recommend the veal, Ganga said judiciously, his finger traversing the menu. They do a very... No thanks, Jane replied. I don't like it. There was too much tarragon or something like that. I think I'll just have the spaghetti. Staff looked up with an artificially neutral expression on his face.
What did I have?
He said. Scampi, Jane replied, without looking up. It was cold, but you didn't want to make a fuss and send it back.
Thanks,
Staff said quietly.
In that case, I'll try the osso bucco.
In fact, Ganga leaned forward and pushed the menu aside from in front of Jane's face. In fact, he said, there's not much point in us having this meeting since you already know everything we said. Jane shrugged. Well, she replied, I may, but you don't. I can tell you, though, it was a complete waste of... a complete washout, she corrected herself. We didn't achieve anything. Ganga exchanged glances with Staff and grinned. I know, he said. Smart move, huh? Jane looked at him blankly. I beg your pardon, she said. Think. Ganga leaned back and snapped a breadstick. This meeting's already taken place, right? Nothing can change that, sure, but that doesn't mean to say you've still got to go through with having the veal. You can have something nice instead. True? Well, likewise, he continued, after he'd cleared his throat of bread shrapnel, we don't have to reach the same depressing conclusions I gather we're going to reach in what I would call the authorised version. Do you follow me? Jane bit her lip thoughtfully. Oh, well, she said, I certainly don't remember you saying that. You mean... Exactly. Ganga smiled. The first version is strictly for the cameras. You realise that we were all under surveillance, of course. Oh, are we? Jane asked. Or rather, are we? Definitely. Ganga unfolded his napkin and tucked a corner of it behind the knot of his tie. But the version the cameras will see is the authorised version. This one's 100% off the record.
It will never have taken place, you see.
Staff broke in.
So we can say what we like without fear of being overheard. It was his idea,
he added generously.
This fellow here's got a brain like a pinball machine, but it does come in handy when the going gets devious.
I see, Jane said, and in doing so told the truth. In exactly the same way she could see a whole page of Chinese without understanding a word of it. So, what do we talk about? Staff poured himself a glass of mineral water, examined it carefully to make sure it was still there, and drank it.
We felt it was time we sort of took stock, he said gravely, see where we've reached and so forth.
In other words, Ganga went on, smoothly catching the narrative relay baton from his colleague, it's work in progress time. Midterm report, if you like, okay? Jane nodded. Fine, she said. And before you start, if you want to call it a day, that's fine by me. The two senior officials looked at each other in surprise.
Whatever you made you say that? Staff demanded. Don't tell me you don't find the work challenging enough.
Jane laughed sourly. Oh, it's challenging, all right, she said. After a moment's pause, she folded her arms and set her face in a grim, nobody leaves until the culprit owns up expression. I must say, she said, I do think you two might have warned me before I started.
Didn't we?
Ganga said innocently. I thought we... Did you hellas like? Jane interrupted angrily. You told me you wanted someone with a fresh perspective and no vested interest to sort out the way this administration of yours works. That's fine. Maybe I might be able to help you with that. A little bit. What you didn't tell me was that you want me just as part of some horrible office politics thing of your own. Well, I'm sorry, but no. Ganga, for once, looked confused. At least he wasn't smiling, and without a smile to hold them together, his features tended to sag like an unpropped clothesline. Hold on, he said. That's not... Jane ignored him. Let me just give you an example, she said. Take this time thing. You wanted me to sort it out. Everybody seems to acknowledge it needs sorting out. Fine, I've thought about it, and I think I've come up with an answer that works. Staff's eyebrows shot up like the price of gold in an oil crisis.
You have? He said. How?
Jane frowned. It's really very simple, she said. Instead of having it all just lying about and slopping around, all like an ever-rolling stream bears all of its sons away sort of thing, you should just put the whole thing on rails. Then everybody would know exactly where it was meant to be going, and we wouldn't have any more of those dreadful flashbacks.
What flashbacks?
Then everybody will know exactly where it's meant to be going, and we wouldn't have any more of those dreadful flashbacks.
What flashbacks?
Then everyone would know exactly where it's meant to be going, and we wouldn't have any more of those dreadful flashbacks.
What flashbacks? Oh, all right, Staff admitted. Point taken. But just think of the...
And don't say it was because of the cost, Jane interrupted. Again, it's as plain as the nose on your face that you finance it by bringing in private capital. The shareholders put up the cost of building the track, and in return they get a slice of the tolls and fares in perpetuity. She thought for a moment and smiled. And boy, do I mean perpetuity. But nobody's done it, have they? And nobody's going to do it either. I checked the files.
You did what?
I checked the files.
You did what?
Hang on, Jane said, and she banged the side of the table with the flat of her hand. Loose connection somewhere, probably. Sorry, yes, I checked the files. It's a funny feeling, you know, reading about what you're going to do in a dusty old file you find at the back of a pile of old boxes in the cleaning cupboard. Anyway, there it all was, and guess what? The idea was completely ignored, and I left the department after 14 days with absolutely nothing to show for it. Now then, she leaned her elbows on the table and gave Staff the sort of look that would have made a mammoth in an ice floor in Siberia start wondering where the sudden nip in the air was coming from. What's it all in aid of? She asked. I mean... Before anyone could speak, they became aware of someone standing over them, radiating disapproval. Staff was the first one to remember how his voice worked.
Right, he said. To start with, I think we're all having the melon.
You may be, said the waitress, her notebook closing like a carnivorous plant. Herr, no, she's bad, okay? Ganga and Staff looked at each other.
I beg your pardon?
The waitress tutted like a distant machine gun. Your lady friend, she replied. Calls herself a waitress, insults my best customers, leaves without saying nothing, then thinks she can waltz in here ordering melon. No way. Out. There's a Burger King 2 blocks down the street. She added venomously. Say Rosa sent you. Idyllic. It was the only word to describe it. In the far distance, a soft mist hung lightly over blue hills. The long grass, still littered with pearly drops of dew, smelt fresh and clean. The slightest of breezes arched the long, stiff necks of the flowers that grew beside the gently murmuring stream. Here and there a few sheep with pink bows tied round their necks lay under the shade of attractively gnarled oak trees, chewing slowly and counting humans. In the porch of the little loaf-shaped cottage, a young mother with a baby on her knee rocked slowly backwards and forwards, crooning an ancient lullaby. Orbeth sainon sianon, kurara lanon rianon, ital ninirian meanon. Bjorn materialised. Fell about 5 feet out of nothingness, landed heavily on all fours, recovered and looked about him. His senses took in all the available information and made a correct assessment.
"Oh, shit," he said. "Not again."
"Have a nice day now."
Yes, thanks.
Staff replied absent-mindedly and lifted the tray. He steered it back towards the corner table, hampered in doing so by the fact that he could only just see over the top of the chips. "Oh," said Jane. "I thought I asked for the double chili nut burger with regular onions."
Did you?
Staff gave her a long look, combining threats with entreaties. "However," Jane added quickly, "this looks simply delicious, whatever it—"
"Right," Ganga interrupted. "Here we all are, and to business."
He twitched his handkerchief out of his top pocket and tucked it into his collar. The other two gave him hard, cold looks, which he entirely failed to notice.
"Agenda time," he went on. "If we start off generally considering A, our overall aim and objectives, B, our achievements to date, C—"
"Your tie's just gone in the barbecue sauce," said Jane.
"C,"
Ganga continued, moving his tie slightly,
"obstacles to be overcome,
D—" Staff coughed meaningfully.
Yes, he said. All right, we get the point. There's no need to be so damned ceremonious about it all.
Ganga frowned at him. That is to say, he smiled at him with added eyebrows.
D,
he said firmly. Jane shook her head. Sorry to butt in, she said, but can we start now? Only I do have work I ought to be getting on with. She stopped, and a sound like a laugh heard through a bacon slicer came out of her mouth. Mind you, she added, for the life of me I can't see the point. Can you? Ganga lowered his head and stirred his coffee with a pencil. Staff turned a chunk of crisp golden something or other round in his fingers and stared into the salt cellar. Can you? Jane repeated. There was a moment of complete silence, except for the sound of 163 people eating and talking loudly in the background. Ganga removed his pencil from the coffee, wiped it carefully on the paper napkin and put it back in his inside pocket. Perhaps, he said slowly, we ought to explain. Jane blinked, said, oh, and instinctively reached for a chip. Ganga's elbow was in the way, but man's reach must exceed man's grasp, or what's a heaven for? Go on, she said, her mouth full. Staff put down his crisp, golden whatever, which was malting a sticky red and yellow sauce down the back of his hand, making him look like a wounded Martian. Then he looked Jane in the eye.
It's like this, he said. What we told you about the administration being right up a tree and needing an outside view and a new broom and that sort of thing is absolutely kosher and on the level. You know that. You've seen for yourself, but there's more to it than that.
Yes, absolutely. Ganga, leaning forward to emphasise the importance of his words, froze. Then he slowly lifted his arm, inspected his elbow and shuddered.
But really, it's all part of the same thing. I mean, yes, the administration is a real mess, but how do you think it got that way?
Jean thought for a moment. Things do, she said.
Of their own accord, you mean?
Staff said.
Entropy theory and its application to practical office management. It's true enough as far as it goes.
Too right, Jane interrupted. Ask anyone who's ever been responsible for paperclip distribution. I never believed in black holes and time warps until they put me in charge of the stationery cupboard one week.
But,
Staff went on,
it's not the whole story, you see. Things in their natural state don't naturally gravitate into a mess. For instance, if you pour sand out of a bucket onto the ground, it forms a nice, neat cone. If you spill water, you get a lovely pool with the sides all nicely level and a precisely flat top. It's only work that flops about all over the place if you drop it.
That's because work isn't natural, you see. Ganga interjected through a jaw full of bap. That's your basic thermodynamics. Narrator's note. Now, do you call it a bap, a bread roll, a stoppy, a stotty, a bun? What would you call it? Just asking. I don't know what those things are that you get in fast food joints, but it sure as hell isn't a stotty. I digress. Is it? Ganga nodded and wiped his lips neatly with the corner of his napkin. Work, he said, is defined as the result of applying energy to a stationary mass. That's filing, surely, Jean murmured. Ganga ignored her, which in turn results in the mass acquiring momentum. He went on, which leads on to movement, which creates friction. Depends what you move. I once moved someone else's pot plant because it gave me hay fever, and there was friction for weeks after that, which dissipates energy, resulting in entropy. He picked up a lemon-scented paper towel and began absent-mindedly folding it in ever-diminishing squares. Because of entropy, he continued, work sort of frays at the edges, bits come loose and fall off. These in turn become random particles of disoriented matter, possessing momentum but not direction. Ah, Jane said. You mean auditors? These particles wander about, collide with other bodies, and thereby create other little chips and splinters of disoriented matter. And eventually, Jane interrupted, they end up in some poor devil's in tray at 5:15 on Friday afternoon. I know, I've been there. Ganga looked down at his fingers. The paper towel had by now become so infinitesimally small that for all practical purposes it had ceased to exist. It's these little bits of stray work that cause all the hassle, he said, but it's not the in-trays they end up in. It's people.
So, Staff said, in order to solve the problems, you first have to solve the people, agreed?
Jane shrugged. As an original discovery, she felt the statement was on a par with trying to patent the wheel in 1986. Of course, she said, but what's this got to do with...
Tell her,
Staff said. Ganga opened his mouth and left it open. If a medieval cook had been passing, he'd instinctively have stuck an apple in it. Well, Ganga said at last, what do you do if you've got a blocked drain? Get a drain rod and give it a good sharp poke, and that's what we're trying to do. Trouble is, he said, looking away, it's not as straightforward as that. Quite. Oh, Jane said. Why not?
Because,
Staff replied. Ah, Jane said, nodding. Now I get you. She frowned. But where do I come in? She said. Simple, Ganga answered. You're the drain rod, as per the original brief, except that we didn't tell you about the people, only about the problems. Exactly, said Jane. Why was that? Staff shifted uncomfortably in his seat.
Well,
he said,
the thing is, you coming to work for the administration was, strictly our idea. Ganga's and mine. We were supposed to clear it with all sorts of people, committees, departmental managers, subcommittees, all that sort of thing. But we didn't.
Why not?
Because they wouldn't have agreed, Ganga said. Plus, they'd have guessed what we were up to. Some of them,
replied Staff, nodding.
So, what we were doing, being absolutely frank and open about the whole thing, was sending you in without any backup or support whatsoever, with the express purpose of getting up the noses of some of the most important people in the whole administration. We knew they wouldn't let you do anything really useful. In fact, we're absolutely amazed how much you've managed to get done. No, the whole point of the exercise was to get them well and truly annoyed and angry, and then, with any luck, they'll make mistakes and we'll have them.
Jane sat for a moment. I see, she said. But why didn't you tell me all that in the first place? Because you'd have refused, Ganga replied. Wouldn't you? I suppose so, said Jane thoughtfully. Probably not, actually, but I wouldn't have done it so well. I'd have been all furtive and apologetic about it, I expect, because I'd have known I was up to something sneaky.
Sneaky?
Jane nodded her head.
Sneaky in a good cause, she said, but definitely sneaky. As it is, I've charged along thinking I had right on my side, and it's them who are being difficult and obstructive. Yes, I get the idea now. Good, Ganga said cheerfully. This coffee, by the way, tastes as if it spent the last year in a gearbox. It certainly explains, Jane continued, why you two have been taking such a keen interest in everything I've been doing.
You noticed that then?
Staff inquired. Yes, Jane said. I thought it was odd at the time. 2 high-ranking officials personally supervising just one trainee. You said it was because I was a guinea pig. Not so much a guinea pig, Ganga said, half to himself. More one of those white rabbits you get in research. Staff kicked him under the table.
Anyway,
Staff said,
we've come clean. So what about it? Are you still going to carry on?
Jean scratched the tip of her nose with her plastic straw. Oh, I don't see why not, she said. It's not as if I've got anything better to do. Suddenly, she stood up. Of course not, she said. I think this whole thing is probably a bad dream I've been having, and unless I wake up pretty soon, I'm going to miss my bus. What the hell do you two think you've been playing at, anyway? Staff was about to say something, but Ganga shushed him. Other diners turned their heads and looked at them. First of all, Jane continued, gathering momentum but not appearing to dissipate any energy in the process, this weirdo here comes and tells me he's a... Not that word, please, Ganga said softly. And that he wants me to come and work for him, and until I agree he's going to camp out permanently in my ear. Then, she said, turning to Staff, who instinctively moved a little further behind his coffee cup, you turn up and tell me that unless I pack in my job with Burridge's and come and work for you instead, the world is going to end. And somehow, she added with feeling, you convince me, probably because of a couple of conveniently timed natural disasters. And so that's what I do. And first, I rescue a major city from a flood, and then I help you cover up the fact that you're so damn laid back that anybody can just walk into your premises and help themselves the major star of their choice. And I somehow start believing, yes, maybe this is for real after all. And then she paused, scrabbling around for words in the same way a motorist at a toll booth searches for an elusive coin. And then, just when I'm beginning to be able to look at myself in the mirror every morning without wanting to burst out laughing, you tell me that what I'm really doing is helping you two with some weird boardroom coup or other. Well, she said, you can take your job and you can stuff it because... She stopped dead. My God, she whispered. I've been wanting to say that to somebody all my life, and now I actually have. Whee! She pulled herself together, straightened her back, and picked up her handbag. Sorry, she said, but I'm through. I'd give you a month's notice, but after a week in the Department of Time, I shuddered to think what you'd do with it. Goodbye. She turned her head toward the door and started to walk towards it. Bearing in mind the way the cosmos is run and who runs it, credit has to be given for the fact that she got over halfway before the ground suddenly opened up and swallowed her up. Oh, where's Jane going to end up? Where is Bjorn? Do we know the answers? But we will do in the next episode, which is coming in a couple of days, I hope. But yes, so I've got a good schedule this week. I've got no appointments until February now, so we've got 10 days. 11 days where I don't have to run about for appointments or for anything, so I'm quite looking forward to that. So, as ever, if you can, hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode, hit the notifications bell, share and subscribe, la-di-da, and all that sort of malargles. It would help the channel and I'd be very, very grateful. I'd appreciate it very much as ever. I know I say it all the time, and trust me, it doesn't give me any more pleasure than it gives you. But yes, I'm going to do my best for you. This week, as I said, because I haven't got any more appointments this week, which is amazing. I'm so glad about that. And yeah, things are improving exponentially. But please, please, please let me know you're out there. Let me know you're okay and that everything's all right. And let me know how you're doing, because I always like to hear from you guys. It's always very nice. I know I've got a couple of emails to get back to this afternoon, which I'm really looking forward to, because it's nice to sit down with a cup of tea and an email. Because it's just that way. It is lovely. But yes, please let me know what's going on with you, what's happening for the rest of your January. Again, we're looking at other books that we're going to be doing for the rest of the year. So, you know, any suggestions you've got, keep them coming, because I like the ones I've got. Absolutely love the ones I've got.
As I said the last time, I probably couldn't do Toe Pratchett as much justice as others. I know that for a fact. And also sometimes when you do certain books, certain other creators tend to zone in on them. And yes, you know how it is in a very competitive market. Yes, I don't like being part of a market. I like being creative. I had a lovely chat with the author who I work with most of all. And you know, she was saying that it's totally understandable when you're creative and you just get that block. And then when you see all the other noise going on, it just kind of makes that block even larger. So it's nice to kind of just everything bite size. And I will get on next time we have our little narrations on the wonderful conversations I've been having with my darling friend, you know who you are, about wordsmithing and places and what places are famous for, because I was absolutely howling, was it yesterday or the day before, when I was it's just that thing about having a business with ladies for pleasure in a retirement home. And I still can't think about it without chuckling. Hey, everybody's got a life to live and a lot to give, not just. Oh my goodness gracious. So, as I said, I'm going to keep doing my best, and I am really, really sorry for the last week or so. It starts January has been a real challenge, and it's got to be a better year. We want a better year, hopefully. The next 4 years is going to be abysmal. But we can deal with it. We're going to be fine. We're going to just keep surging ahead, moving forward, and doing our very, very best. I appreciate you all very much. Thank you for listening to all my waffle and my tangents and all that sort of thing. And yeah, let's do this thing. Take care of yourself. Hydrate if you're too hot. Wrap yourself up like a human burrito if you're too cold. Drink tea or coffee, whichever is the tipple of your choice. And most of all, stay safe, and I'll see you soon, Petal. Take it easy.